First of all, I will ask you to introduce yourself, David Hatwood, and explaining your activity in human rights, especially.
Okay. Well, my name is David Atwood. I am close to 80 years old now. Next month I'll be 80, so I've been around for a while. Uh, I am the founder of the Texas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. I am also currently on the board of an organization called the Houston Peace and Justice Center. Uh, I am a member of Amnesty International, and I have been involved in human rights work for uh, about 30 years now, 35 years of my life. And so I've been involved looking at human rights, looking at uh, general peace and justice issues in the United States. And I've actually have traveled to Italy several times to talk primarily about the death penalty, but I'm also interested in broader human rights issues. Uh,
Wow.
I'm currently doing this interview from Colorado. Actually, I'm not in Houston, but I keep track of everything that's going on here in this state, in Texas, and throughout the United States.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, David. I'm a member of Amnesty International Italian Section 2, and I worked for Italian Coalition Against Death Penalty too, and that's why we know each other even if we never met before. I'm just
Okay.
explaining for people who will watch this interview. Okay, we start the first real question about what happened on 6th of January. Okay, you said you are from Texas, and I know you were living in Texas since many years, and Texas is Republican state since many years. So I will ask you how you, as a white citizen of Texas, has lived the experience of what happened on 6th of January, and how a medium citizen of Texas has lived this experience. A medium Republican voting man has lived this experience. If you know this.
Well, yes. So we moved to Texas in 1972, and we still live there, although I'm in Colorado at this time. Uh, Texas is politically a very conservative state. Politics, the governors, lieutenant governors, all your top officials are Republicans, and in fact, one of the Republicans, one of our senators, Ted Cruz, was in a way instrumental in what happened in Washington on January 6th. So it's a state it's not an easy state to live in if you are a progressive person concerned with human rights, as I am. But it's a good place to be because you have to fight back against some of these things that are happening. And so I guess I ended up there to work on human rights issues for many years, and but it's difficult now. It is changing slowly. You see that over the years that I have been there, there are uh, people have moved to Texas from many places in the United States and around the world, and so the kind of originally Texas was part of the old, what we call the old South, where you had racism, and there's still racism there, but it's not quite as strong as it was. And because you've had people move there from other states, northern states, western states, eastern states, and from other parts of the world now. So things have got somewhat better, although they're not what they should be.
And what was
So,
the reaction?
excuse me, I'm sorry.
What was the reaction on what happened a few days ago?
The reaction of most people was being horrified at what happened in Washington on January 6th. Even many what we would call conservative Republicans have spoken out against it. The problem is, though, is that many of them, by not doing the right thing over the last, well, for several years, contributed to the problem. And so, yes, it's good they're speaking out against it now, but there are many things that they did over the years, including when they had the opportunity of convicting Trump several years ago, they would not do it. So I'm glad Republicans are speaking out what happened on January 6th, but at the same time, they contributed to the problem. And I'm not sure even now that they will change tremendously in their approach to what goes on in our country. We have many problems in our country, and I can talk about those in a minute if you'd like.
Yes, yes. I have one or two questions about that. First of all, how do you think the information, the news about what happened is now going in USA? And do you feel satisfied about information and details that media are going to live in these days on what happened?
Well, what I see so far, most of the news here is about doing something about Trump. That is the primary focus right now, is on Trump. How to keep him from doing more harm for the, roughly 10 days or so that he will be in office. And that's important. I mean, I think that is important. However, the news media in not only Texas, but the United States has not really yet focused on the underlying problems that led to this. And that's what needs to happen, or else things really won't change. They will think, well, we got rid of Trump and the problem is over, but it's not over. The problem is still very serious in terms of a lot of different factors. And if the news media does not address those factors, then we're going to have this same issue come up again and again in this country. So the news media has to, at some point, turn around from just focusing on Trump, which is appropriate now, but it has to go beyond that as to some of the fundamental problems in our country. And by the way, the problems we have here also affects other countries.
Right.
So it's not just the United States, but it's obvious what's happened here has put a spotlight on these problems.
Right. I have a question about it. Let's go straight to the problem you are talking about. I read two books by two American philosophers. One is Timothy Snyder. The book is called On Tyranny, and it's published in 1217. And another book is by Jason Brennan. It's called Against Democracy, and it is published in 2019. Both books talk about problems of democracy, what you called just before the underlying problems of democracy in USA, and they are a direct attack to Trump. Okay, And so I'm asking, uh, do you think that citizens in United States are aware of the underlying problems of democracy in the last years, of which you talked just before?
Well, I think that there are some people in our country who are better educated, who know about these underlying problems. I would have to say at this time, the majority of the citizens of this country do not know about these problems because they haven't read the books you're talking about in other books. They may be a little aware, but not really aware of how. The way I look at it is that Trump was like the match that that lit the fire. But what all the fuel that went into the fire is these underlying problems that we have. Of uh, I can talk about it a little bit now if you would like me to.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. If you can
well,
say some of the underlying problems, just briefly, if you can, just
okay. Well,
naming this problem.
yeah. The first one really is that millions of people in our country are not well educated on democracy. They're not well educated. Um, so we have a lot of ignorance. We have a lot of ignorance in our country. And then another problem is that over the last 40 years in the United States, there has been a growing divide between the rich and the poor. There has been a conscious effort of some politicians and business interests to destroy unions in our country. And they have been successful. And unions helped a lot of people move into the middle class and have a somewhat decent life. But there's been an effort to destroy unions. And so you have this growing divide between the rich and the poor over the last, particularly 40 years, since the time of Ronald Reagan. And it's got worse and worse. So there are a lot of people who do not feel part of what's going on in this country. I use the word disenfranchised. They don't feel like they're part of what's going on or have very much control about what's going on. And they're getting poorer. I mean, we have millions of people living out on the streets in this country, and other people that are maybe they're not living on the streets, but they're very close to living on the streets. So if you're in that sort of a situation and you're ignorant about history, which is another factor, not only history of our country, the United States, but the history of the world when you had autocrats get into power and do very destructive things. They're not aware. Myself, when Trump came into power 4 years ago and spoke the way he spoke, I'm somewhat familiar with the history of the world. I'm not an expert on it, but I'm somewhat knowledgeable. I could tell right away that he was going to be very bad for our country, for the United States. And he was not interested in the welfare of the people of the United States. And unfortunately, he had a number of people that I call enablers who enabled him to do what he did. These were people that wanted power themselves, wanted greed, people who had greed, who'd wanted money and wanted power. And so rather than confront Trump, they allowed him to do what he did. And this all culminated on January 6th in that invasion of the U.S. Capitol. But the things, I mean, there were, like I said, there were millions of people in this country who were uneducated, they were disenfranchised, they didn't feel they were part of the American system, they didn't think they had any power. And then another factor I'll mention real quickly is that we had, quote, religious leaders, Christian pastors in this country, who said that Trump was sent by God to solve the problems of this country. These people are solely misled. In fact, I've got some people in my family that fit into that category. Not close relatives, but relatives in other parts of the country. And so you put this all together, ignorance,
to divide,
right, and then these religious factors, boom, it all came together. And then, you'd have to say, quite frankly, that there's a lot of, the thing they call this QAnon thing that got going on the internet, people who you would think would not believe any of that stuff latched onto this. And I still don't totally understand how anybody could do that. But you had people that you would think would have more sense latched onto this. So you put this all together with Trump, and then you end up on January 6th with what happened in Washington.
Yeah. About ignorance, one of the books I named before is very specific about ignorance of the medium electoral class in America. And in fact, it's called Against Democracy. It's a provocation in a sense. But it's very, very interesting because this book talked about the inappropriate title of some people to express their vote. But as you said, ignorance is tied to the economical divide, to the difference between rich and poor. So it's a real problem. Okay, thank you very much. And just two short questions to end. One is, nowadays, do you in the United States do you think people feel the gravity of what happened, or there are, according to you, a lot of citizens who still defend Trump, or who still think that elections were stalled, or something like that?
No, I think that most people in this country, the majority at least, feel that the elections were done. No election is perfect, but I think most people feel that it was done as well as it could be done. And so, I think the majority of people feel that way, believe that way.
Even excuse me, even in Republican electors.
No, the Republicans. I think there are some Republicans feel that the election was not fair, but in most cases, if you didn't have somebody like Trump repeating that over and over publicly, saying the election was stolen, then I think that exacerbated the whole thing. But I think, even among the Republicans, as you know, there's a range of people who are moderate Republicans, and then you get extreme right-wing Republicans. You get both. And I think the moderate Republicans believe that the election was fair. The Republicans on the far right probably would believe that something was wrong and the election was stolen. But the problem is that Trump added to that fire. He just kept doing it and doing it. And the morning of January 6th, as you're sure well aware, he gave this big rally in Washington that he wanted and that he invited. And he'd been doing that for a long time. Yeah, Trump has he's a man with very, very many problems and very complex. You should never have a person like that as your president. But he got in, and there were a lot of Republicans, even some of the moderate Republicans, supported him. They didn't really stand up. They allowed him to be their candidate, first of all, and then they supported him when it was obvious, I think, to many of us at least, that this was a troubled man and he was not good for this country. But there were Republicans, both moderate and right-wing, that supported him and allowed him to do what he did.
Right.
And that was very sad.
Right. And you said that Trump has a lot of problems. I say, just like some of the most famous dictators of the 20th century. Okay. And that is a problem.
I put him in that category. I do. I really do. I mean, I wrote some letters to the editor and different communications right off saying he reminds me of Hitler and Mussolini.
Yeah.
He does.
This is a real problem of the leaders of today. Okay. The last question, Dave, about the underlying problems that we talked about. Do you think that the new elections, that the Biden presidential mandate, and the fact that Harris is the highest level of a woman in USA in political steps, do you think that this news can do some difference in for the underlying problems we talked about?
Yes, I think that they can. There can be some real improvements made. They will be much better than what we've had for the last 4 years. However, one of the major problems of our country is what I call unbridled capitalism, which has contributed to this divide between the rich and the poor. The Democrats have to be stronger on what I would call economic justice and helping people who are poor and downtrodden not to stay in that situation. If the Democrats are weak on that, and there's, when we had the election, I personally was for people like Bernie Sanders because he was much more progressive. I don't know if he would have got elected actually, but his politics for me were much better than some of the more moderate Democrats. And my worry is that the Democrats, there are a lot of moderate Democrats. There are some that are further to the left that I favor, but there are some that are very conservative. And if they don't really make some major changes in the economic situation, I mean, in address like healthcare, we got millions of people that don't have health care in this country. Millions of people living on the streets. Millions of people just barely surviving economically. And if the Democrats that are in power now, I believe they will be better, certainly, than Trump and the Republicans. But if they're not strongly progressive and address some of these underlying problems, not only the economics, but the education. We need to do so much better educating people.
Yeah.
And we need to strongly address, better than we ever have in the past, the underlying racism that we have in this country. We still have people at all levels, including the highest levels of government, who are racists. They're still racist. They haven't erased that. I mean, that goes back into the history of our country, the racism. And and it's still there, and it contributed. It was one of the contributing factors to what just happened. We saw flags of the Confederacy being carried to the Capitol in Washington. So that's a problem too. So the Democrats that are in now, Biden, Harris, and the others, they will be better. They will be an improvement, but they have to address some of these underlying problems in a stronger way than we've ever done it in the past.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dave. We talked about ignorance, we talked about religion, we talked about the economical divide, we talked about racism, and we in Europe know that these are problems of the United States, but we also knew that these are problems of our democratic states in Europe, because United States was always a mirror for the European democracies. And this is why we are so concerned about what happened on 6th of January, because what happened there in Capitol Hill, the fear is that could happen even today or tomorrow here in Rome or in Paris or in Berlin, because populism is fed with what you said about ignorance, religion, fanatism, economical divide, and racism. So I really feel, talking to you, that we are just quite a family in the same problems, both parts of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, and this is the reason why it's was very a pleasure to talk with you. So I'd like to do the best wishes for your next birthday, 80s. You seems very fine in your 80. Okay,
Thank
and
you.
so
Thank you.
happy birthday, and thank you very much, really, to have stayed with me today, and have a good Sunday. Bye bye. Thank you, Vadim.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Francesco.
you.
Peace. Peace. Right.
Peace.
Thank
Peace
you.
to you.